Hello everyone, it's standing room only by the look of it, but there are a few seats here if you'd like to find your way through. Welcome, I'm Robina Xavier, I'm the Executive Dean of the QUT Business School here at Gardens Point, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this fantastic event tonight. We had so much demand for this event. It's probably been one of our most well attended. So it's great to see the interest in such an important topic. As we start tonight, I acknowledge the Turrbal and Yuggera people as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to the elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. We have always recognised that this part of the river has long been a place of learning, teaching and research, and QUT is very honoured to be able to continue with that tradition. Tonight, of course, we're going to explore Government 5.0, the future of public services, and such an important topic for the work that everybody does and the impact that it has on our communities. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers, and I'll leave the individual host to take you through each of those panels. But thank you so much for all of you for coming, and some have come from afar to be with us tonight to join such an important discussion. I'd also like to thank the founding partners of the Chair in Digital Economy, PwC, the Queensland Government, Brisbane Marketing and of course QUT, in particular Craig Fenton, Kat Matson and Rowena Richardson. Thank you so much for all the support that you've had over many years. And also we have a number of senior QUT colleagues here tonight, Bob O'Connor from QUTX, Professor Rowena Barrett, who is now running QUT Entrepreneurship, Professor Roger Helens from the Institute for Future Environments, and of course Professor Marek Kowalkiewicz, who's going to feature on the stage a lot tonight. We have many partners, associates and friends of the QUT Business School and more broadly QUT here tonight. And that's really important to us because, as you know, QUT positions ourselves as the university for the real world, and those links with the real world, ensuring that we are very connected to the real world, is what makes QUT special, and we're certainly committed to that as we go forward. We're also very committed to the important role that academic institutions like QUT play in thought leadership and being able to take this important work out into the public arena to have these important discussions is very much what we need to do. But we can't do that without the support of many people. And I'd like to thank tonight our primary sponsor, SAP, in particular Chris, Ryan and Greg, who are here with us. SAP supports the business school in many different ways, and it's fantastic that we've been able to partner together on tonight's event. And also QUTX, which is the professional and executive development for QUT, who is also supporting tonight's event, and Bob O'Connor is here representing QUTX. QUT's had long and very strong partnerships with government across Australia, engaging in education, research partnerships, professional development opportunities, such as secondments, contributions to advisory boards and graduate programs for many years. And we're also proud to be a preferred supplier for the All of Government Digital Capability Partnerships panel. Some of you will know that we teach the Public Sector Management Program all around Australia to all levels of government in 9 cities. And this has been a fantastic way for us, again, to get very close in this area, to understand the challenges that are happening within the public service and to see how we can help in the education space to help meet those challenges. The Chair in Digital Economy was established in 2015, really before there was probably a definition of what digital economy was. And it was fantastic to see the initiative come together to really get ahead of these key challenges that we knew industry was going to face. Obviously today, organisations are prioritising digital capability, transformation and innovation in their strategic plans, but there's so much more to do, and many of you in this room are key to leading that transformation. We know in the training we do with leaders that there's still a lot of information, a lot of understanding to come, and being able to understand where the benefits of the digital transformation come from, but also where those challenges are and how to ready your organisation for that. The Chair was established as a unique partnership between the academy, government and business, and this partnership was really important because we wanted to ensure we had all of these different dimensions recognised in the work that we do, and it's been fantastic to see that grow over the course of the Chair's growth. We're obviously very proud of the work that the Chair in Digital Economy has achieved here at QUT. Its influence is not just in the business school but across the university, and the important engagements that have come both within Queensland and also nationally, and we have many more plans for bigger things to come. But of course, tonight's conversation is around Government 5.0 and the future of public services, and this will draw across that breadth of work of the Chair in Digital Economy, as well as the work with Commonwealth and Queensland state governments and the Brisbane City Council to really understand and drive that transformation. So it gives me great pleasure to now welcome our host, Professor Marek Kowalkiewicz, to lead the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Robina. Last year, over $1.5 trillion was spent on digital transformation efforts, $1.5 trillion. And according to World Economic Forum, only 1% of those initiatives are going to reach their goals. 1%, yes, you heard it right. So if you're at 10% with your institution, then, well, you're doing quite well. You're way above the benchmark. Is digital transformation in public sector different? Yes, of course it is. And we're going to unpack the digital transformation in public sector throughout the event today. But before we do it, let me walk you through the different stages of evolution of public services and also highlight 6 trends that we've identified that are going to impact your own digital transformation efforts. I need to take you on a journey. So imagine you wake up one day and realize there's a particular social challenge that needs to be addressed, and you, as a leader of a public service organization, need to address it in a specific way. Well, you're just witnessing Government 1.0, the emergence of services, where you, as that leader, create a service. You focus on quality of this service, and you focus on making sure that this service is accessible. If you do your job well, the service is up and you can go to sleep. You sleep well, or at night, you twist and turn and you start to ask yourself, is that service that I just created, that I made available, is it available to everyone? Well, when you wake up the next day, you're going to start focusing on 2.0, where we're looking into industrializing of public services. This is when you ask yourself, how can I scale my service? How can I scale it up so that more citizens, more customers can access that service? But also, how can I scale it or change the way it's being delivered or accessed so that people with different needs can also access those? So you create this service that now is accessible to everyone. Equitability is the key word here. You're happy, you go to sleep. And then at night you think, was this correct? Or did I just create a perfectly equitable service that's also cash burning, resource guzzling, and potentially not a very efficient service? This is when you wake up, you become a Government 3.0 servant. You focus on automation, you focus on efficiency, you create a very lean, very efficient machine of your services. You focus on practicality. And when you focus on practicality, it might mean that you cut out some parts of that service. It might mean that you make it less available to some groups, but that's Government 3.0. And then you go to sleep. And you dream about your service. It's lean, it's efficient. It might be cheap, but it's a good cheap in this case. But it's also alone. And then you realize government, citizens do not access individual services. They need more than that. They need to work with other services. So when you wake up the next day, you're at the Government 4.0 stage that we call digitalization. On this stage, you're asking yourselves, how can I partner with other departments within my government? You focus on the business model. You focus on making sure you orchestrate, you facilitate, you activate, you create a one-stop shop, maybe even a no-stop shop for your services. You focus on the whole of government approach to delivery of your services. And then you go to sleep. And you have a nightmare. You have a nightmare about Facebook having a whole of Facebook approach to you. You have a nightmare about a hospital having a whole of hospital approach to you. Maybe QUT having a whole of QUT approach to you. And that makes you realize that maybe At this stage, Government 4.0, you've been focusing on the wrong thing. You've been focusing on the business model and the organization, but forgot who the services are for. That makes you wake up, and Government 5.0 is all about personalization. It's all about you realizing that perhaps it's not the business model, but the citizen model that you should be focusing on top of all of the previous one, right? There is desirability. You want citizens or customers, however you want to call them, to want to use your services, not just have to use your services. Instead of whole of government approach, you have a whole of life approach. Now, it's not easy to have a whole of life approach. You need to go outside your bubble, your institution, your department, your government. You need to go outside and partner with other governments, whether it's different levels of governments, whether it's, other institutions. You need to think about the individuals that use your services, the organizations or people. And this is truly the first time you live to your mantra of being fully citizen-centric. At this stage, we think Government 5.0 is the beacon, is the stage that we want a lot of services to evolve to. Not all of them are there, not a lot of them have to be there. It's absolutely fine for some of your services to be at 1.0, 2.0, and so on. You just need to have this map. And we're giving you the map so that you can understand a bit more where your services are and how you can manage them. We've been thinking about the future of public services and what those stages are. We've been thinking quite a lot about them, actually since 2015. So for the past 4 years, we've run 23 so-called innovation sprints with all levels of government, reimagining the future of delivery of public services. We've worked with over 500 government executives, worked with them, learned with them on exploring this. And this all led us to developing this framework. Now, that's not it really. Like I said, there's a framework, 1.0 to 5.0, but there are also trends that are going to impact your success in digital transformation. Think about all those keywords: mobile first, digital first, online first. As we move away from that face-to-face delivery of services, we move towards customers dealing with forms, with processes, with reports. But recent reports show that citizens, humans, customers actually require more human touch rather than less. And there are organizations that start to recognize it. Banking sector, industry sector, they're sort of reversing that direction. They still automate a lot of what they do, but they make sure that the human face of the machine is what they offer to their customers. So as Government 5.0 leaders, you should be thinking, how do I create that human face of the machine? I'm not trying to say stop the automation efforts, stop the digitization efforts. All I'm saying is for some services, whenever there's an interface where citizens interact with you, ask yourself, can I put a human there? So the automation is happening behind, but the interaction is still within a human. Or when this is not an option, when you deploy technologies, start to ask yourself, can I talk about effectiveness of my services? Not effectiveness, effectiveness. What feelings do they generate? Can you measure those? Do you measure effectiveness of your services? Not effectiveness, effectiveness. You should be expecting from your algorithms the same that you're expecting from your human workers to create that connection with your customers, with your citizens. We're seeing a lot in the world these days when it comes to automation of government decision making. Right? Rules as code are all the rage at the moment. There are all sorts of other wonderful projects where, say, tax agencies help to or try to identify those taxpayers who might be likely to default on their payments. And those decisions, the identification might be done by the machine. But obviously, this is a big challenge. And a lot of jurisdictions are introducing the so-called right to explanation, which is a right for a human, when they're a subject of an algorithmic decision, to be provided with an explanation of why this decision happened, or reasons for this decision. This might be simple in some cases where the algorithms are, very simple decision tree type of algorithms. But when we're talking about black box types of algorithms, think machine learning, artificial intelligence, sometimes explaining why a decision happened is very, very tricky. So as leaders of Government 5.0, I would like you to think about human checksum as a concept where you introduce a human into an algorithm decision-making process, at least initially, and I'll talk about it in a second. But you introduce them so that they can intervene whenever an algorithm makes a wrong decision. Think about T-shaped people. T-shaped people are people who can connect to other people within your governments, within your departments, who understand the strategic, the operational aspects, the legislative aspects, and those people should also have the digital skills to explain the decisions of the algorithms. Do not outsource 100% to algorithms. Treat your algorithms, at least initially, just like you would treat interns. They're joining your organization, and you don't know what might happen if you leave them alone. So stick with them and create a team, create a human algorithm team. Make sure that the humans and the algorithms, they each deliver on what they're good at. Heard about Nokia? They started as a pulp mill. Toilet paper was what they were selling at the very beginning, right? Then they moved to rubber, electronics, selling gumboots. Then they created mobile networks. At some stage, they started building mobile phones. That's how we know Nokia. Then we all know the story. They sort of, dropped the ball over there. They're back now to, they had a bit of software play, and now they're back into building networks again. Gone are the days when you would expect a business to be born in an industry, thrive in the same industry, and then die in the same industries. Businesses move from industry to industry. They follow their customers. Heard about Virgin? They started as a record label, Virgin Records, right? Now we have Virgin Active, Virgin Australia, Virgin Books, Virgin Care, Virgin Travel, and dozens of other companies. Virgin follows their customers. They focus on what the customers need, and they fulfill their needs. Netflix, another example, right? Started with DVD rental, streaming, then media production. Now they're going into virtual reality. Why are governments not thinking like this? Why are we stuck with the departments that we know, Department of Health, Department of Education, and so on and so on? Shouldn't we be creating maybe virtual departments, departments of life events? I want to talk to a department of I just had a child. I want to talk to a department of I want to start a business and be successful. Right now, I need to span all sorts of departments. The second law of thermodynamics states that the level of disorder in the universe is steadily increasing. And guess what? Physics, thermodynamics also applies to public sector. The complexity of the world grows. Remember the times when you could have a policy which would say for a car that has more than 6 cylinders, this is the rule. For a car that has less than 6 cylinders, this is the rule. Where guess what? Some cars do not have cylinders anymore. Gone are the days where you could look at a car and tell whether it's a taxi or not, where you could look at an apartment and tell whether it's a hotel room or not. Every day, public sector employees, public servants, they need to cope with this challenge of what next is coming tomorrow. And look, it's impossible to predict the future, despite of what sometimes futurists might try to tell you. But what you can do is try to explore possible futures. And we call it loonshot incubation. Loonshot is a term for what precedes a moonshot. Loonshots are ideas that are highly risky, highly easy to fail, and they create that basis for future growth. Now, it's very, very hard. It's practically impossible to run loonshots within the government, right? Think about taxpayers' comments, right? But you need to. You need to figure out how to explore this space, how to explore the possible futures, the continuous next. And perhaps it means outsourcing that loonshot incubation. Perhaps it means working with others, maybe with universities, maybe with public sector that will explore those possible futures and help you identify what direction to take. So that whenever a disruption comes, it's not a disruption for you because you've already explored the possible future. We all heard about digital twins. Digital twins are a concept introduced in Industry 4.0. It's all about taking a physical entity and moving it into a digital world. Buildings have their digital twins. Entire states are starting to have digital twins, where you can basically look into the geospatial information, you can read the data coming from sensors and understand what is happening there. What we're suggesting is that there's a huge opportunity for creating digital twins for governments that not only involve geospatial and sensor information, but also socioeconomic data. This will allow us to perform so-called mass policy simulation. Imagine being able to say, hey, what would happen? What if I banned this particular type of plastic? What if I created a new license that people could apply for? Could I run this simulation in a system like that? We're already doing it with some of our friends here at Queensland Government. We are exploring those opportunities. The most beautiful thing about it is you do not need to experiment or test new policies on a living system, but you can have that first try on a system that's just a virtual representation of a living system. Trend number 6, and possibly the most important of those, is all related to the trust paradox. Governments sit on a lot of citizen data. And there are beautiful, wonderful things that could be done with the data. There's great powers that the government has. And as Uncle Ben says, with great power comes great responsibility. So what could happen? What could go wrong? This is a challenge for the leaders of Government 5.0 to consider what we call the art of digital. We've covered this topic in depth, and when you receive the report on Government 5.0 tonight, you'll be able to read more about it. But this is the exploration of the aspiration, responsibility, and trust. The art, aspiration, responsibility, and trust in the digital age. As public servants, as Government 5.0 leaders, you need to consider the art of digital as an important aspect of all your work. So when you think about this evolution, and remember that in any government institution, there might be all sorts of services. Some of them will be at 1.0, some of them will be at 4.0 or even 5.0. You need to manage them. You need to be aware where they are. You need to decide where you want them to be. But that's a framework that allows you to understand that complexity. Then you need to think about those trends, those digital business and social trends that might be impacting the success of your digital transformation. And if you do it well, hopefully the 1% that I talked about just a few minutes ago, you'll be exactly there among those successful digital transformation projects. Thank you. Now I'm going to stay on stage and switch my hats. And we're going to explore those topics a bit in depth right now. We have 3 panels coming up. We're going to explore build, partner, and grow in Government 5.0. So if I could invite my 2 wonderful friends, Lucy Poole and Professor Kevin D'Souza on stage. Lucy is the head of Government Digital Experience, flew up from Canberra today in the morning. Thank you so much for that, Lucy. And Kevin D'Souza is a professor here at QUT Business School, focusing on business, strategy, and technology. Did I get it right? Fantastic. Well, look, I gave, and the way this works, by the way, I love to just sit back and relax while they were having a conversation. So I'll do this. We also want to take questions from you. So whenever you have questions, go to the webpage sli.do or Slido and type in the hashtag FutureGov. That's where you type in your questions. Other people will vote for those questions. We will see your questions, and sometimes we might react to those questions. Lucy, if we could start with you, tell us a bit more about who you are and what you do, and then I would like to ask you about what keeps you awake at night.
So, based on your introduction, Marek, I'm a very sleepless person. A lot of nightmares. My name is Lucy, and I currently work for the Digital Transformation Agency. I've been there for a year and a half. Prior to that, I worked at the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. And I tell you this because I'm not a typical technical person. In fact, my boss describes me as blocky rather than T-shaped. I probably should get to the bottom of exactly what he's referring to there. But I head up the Government Digital Experience area within the Digital Transformation Agency. And that means that my role is predominantly whole of government, so not so much interested in the individual service transactional layers, but rather the collaboration that occurs across the whole of both federal and state government, and also local, where we can twist their arms and get them involved.
Thanks, Lucy. Kevin, who are you? What keeps you awake at night?
So, well, I am a professor here at QUT, and things that keep me up at night are actually my research and consulting projects that have to do with emerging technologies that are going to shape the future of how we deliver public services, how we manage public policy, and how do we protect our public resources of the future. Because I think emerging technologies can play a highly positive role. However, they can also play pretty strange other roles, negative roles. And so those are the kinds of projects that keep me up globally.
So we need that mature thinking there. So I really wanted the two of you to be on the build panel, because I think you bring, in a way, complementary perspectives. I think, Lucy, you think a lot about people in that technology space. Kevin, you think a lot about technology in that people space, right? Lucy, in your role, you need to connect a lot of people, right? Cross collaboration, is that a term that sort of pops up in, or collaboration, is that a term that pops up a lot in your discussions?
Yeah, it is. And actually, for those of you that caught the Prime Minister's address to the public sector yesterday, would have seen that one of the very last questions that was put to him around culture resulted in him focusing on this concept of collaboration, which is not new to us as public servants. This is something that we've been striving towards for forever. But I think that now there's a slightly different mindset that's attached to collaboration, and it gives me enormous hope and makes me continue on this journey. I didn't quite answer the question that Marek asked me earlier around what keeps me up at night. Actually, what keeps me up is that we've progressed to the extent that we actually now need the back-end plumbing. So our systems of operating, our budget processes, our governance frameworks to now catch up, which is an extraordinary thing for me to be saying. We've come a long way in just a very short period of time. So when I talk about collaboration, it's very much through the lens of we are already doing it. We just need everything else to catch up.
Kevin.
So I think collaboration is key, because unless you are able to do it well, the outcomes can be quite critical. So I'll give you an example. So across the world, most governments are struggling with the issue of how to keep people out of prison, not in prison, but out of prison, right? And so we don't want individuals to go and offend and go into jail because it's expensive, right? So in the US, they actually deployed an algorithm to predict the chance of individuals offending. And they did this along with a private contractor. However, the collaboration was not actually co-creation. It was one where the private contractor actually built everything. The consequences were pretty dire. The same problem in the UK. They actually had the lead government official go and actually get training on analytics and AI. And then that individual led the project on that basically built the exactly same tool to predict 3 outcomes for any offending individual: low, medium, high risk. And if you were in the low, and especially if you were in the medium risk, they gave you an option to go through a remedial program and basically stay out of jail. And in that case, the algorithms actually created a lot of public value. Whereas in the US, that same kind of problem where you did not have actual co-creation through collaboration, you had the application of a private model on a public problem that resulted in severe negative outcomes. So this is why collaboration is key as you build these solutions.
So this sounds very interesting, but this also means that one approach, and I'm sort of consciously being a devil's advocate here. One approach is basically helping government outsource some of the decision making, right? And whether that particular case was successful or not, that's obviously an issue here. But the other approach that you just discussed is actually creating more work for the government, right? More work, Lucy. More work, less work.
Maybe both. I think that as we progress to 5.0, we will certainly be doing different types of work, which hopefully will mean that some of the work that we're currently doing that's sucking up a lot of our human capital can be automated, which will then leave us to do some more of the high-end value work. So I kind of sit on the bench here a little bit, and we had the benefit of a bit of a robust discussion over lunch today. So from my perspective, where I sit within government, I don't actually see that there's an enormous shift in what we do, but rather how we do it. That's sort of the perception that I have. But perhaps time will prove me wrong. I think the most interesting thing coming out of some of the research is around the impact that the change around our work is having on individuals, particularly if you think about things like call centres, where you've got a significant number of people now having to just focus on those really complex problems that come through the line. It's kind of like how, when you're kind of driving along and you see council workers just taking a moment beside the construction site, and everyone's like, actually they're pacing themselves, right? And without the capacity or without the opportunity for people to be able to take those more simple calls, then there's no downtime for their brains, and there's no recharging opportunity. So significant types of impact we're going to see on our workforce going forward.
So I wanted to touch on the how part of your comment just then, and we're looking at the questions coming from the room as well. And there's one that a lot of people are interested in, and I realized that there was probably a pretty provocative statement, right, that I made from stage on those live event experts. How do we move from silo departments to live event experts? And Lucy, obviously, you're so involved with MyGov and all the initiatives there. Is this how you think about citizens?
So this could not be a better question for me, because the work of my team is exactly on mapping life events. And what we do is we use this methodology as a way to break down the silos that exist across both departments and agencies, but also governments. It's actually quite a simple yet effective systems thinking approach. What it means is we can sort of work our way through what is inherently a very, very complex system. So we map out the process from start to end, and it could be having a baby, it could be transitioning into retirement, it could be acquiring a chronic health condition, it could be, a whole range of different things. And what we do is we talk to a whole range of people, both our users, but also government workers, third parties, etc. And what we do is we find out where all of those yucky pain points exist across the service. And they are both pain points that are front end, but also back end. So it's important that we don't forget the pain points that our employees face. Otherwise, we end up with a whole heap of alt controllers in the background trying to work out how they navigate the systems. And so once we've identified all these pain points, we can then together ideate on ways in which we can start to overcome those and slowly but surely start to break down and improve the life journey. Noting, of course, that these things are never over. It's a constant journey. So this is a whole lot of work that's currently going on under the auspices of the Australian Digital and Data Council, which is, of course, a council that now sits under COAG. And I'm very happy to say that there are three key life events that are being taken forward by states and territories. So we've got the birth of a child, which is being led by the ACT government. Queensland is currently taking forward one, and we also have one in New South Wales on end of life. So it is doable, is the message.
So that's the department of my child is born, right? Thank you. Thanks for this. And Kevin, I know you've been looking into the differences between the public sector and the private sector in digital transformation projects. What Lucy just said, does it make you think about any of the differences that you've seen between those two sectors?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key challenge that you face in government is to resolve your interoperability issues. So if you look at your data governance issues, data access, laws around it, rules around it, those are going to take years to actually change. So while we have the technology ready to go that the private company can do, it's extremely hard in government. The exception being is if you're working in the defense space, right? That's the only space that I know of where, given an emergency, given a critical issue, interoperability happens. But even in those environments, I have been in quite a few meetings where individuals have to leave a room because they actually cannot read a report that's in front of them, right? And so even in those cases, interoperability is a challenge. However, in the private sector, if any unit in your organization has access to the data, everybody has access to the data. The other issue is in governments, we have a challenge, which is a pretty critical one. We have a hard time throwing out old stuff, right? And so again, when you think about the cost to keep up legacy infrastructure, that is a significant impediment to doing the kinds of things where we really need to reshape how individuals actually think about government. So in the state of Hawaii, just as an example, we did a project with them 4 years back, where 4 years back, their state government could not have direct deposit. That's how weak their infrastructure was, legacy infrastructure. And so while they could try to innovate through apps and hackathons and all these other things to address the things that you call government 2.0, they had challenges. So again, the private sector has a lot more degrees of freedom, and government, and the other point that I'll make is governments cannot ignore anybody, whereas private sector has the right to price you out of something, choose if they are going to address your need or not, choose how they're going to address your need, whereas governments have to have an all access, all mediums, all device, and those are quite costly. They're not cheap.
Which really plays to the question that we're seeing on the screen. How do we deliver long-term digital change when government decision making is bounded by the electoral term? And I don't know about you, but I feel like our governments are constantly in that electioneering mode these days, which makes it very, very hard. And it seems like we live in a world where there's this favorite pastime sometimes on TV or radio shows where they take names of initiatives, or whether it's research projects or new projects where money are being pumped into exploration, and they just make fun of them without really looking deeper into what's behind them. So I think it's a huge challenge. And when I was talking about loonshots at in the presentation, what I wanted to say, and I didn't, so I'll do it right now, is I wanted to say that bold is the new agile. That we need boldness in our approaches, otherwise we're going to be stuck with this very, very incremental change. So I wanted to ask both of you, starting with Lucy, whether experimentation, whether all those loonshots, let's use this term broadly. It's a wonderful book that you can read about it, and we'll send you links to that book as well. But those loonshots, are they a waste of money or are they not?
Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that at least from where I sit, that experimentation and the use of agile methodology is an incredible de-risker. So it means that we're not investing huge amounts of money without really knowing if it's the problem or the solution that we're trying to fix. So to kind of connect with the question that was asked around how it is that we manoeuvre our work around the election cycles, this is an inherent issue that's been something that we've struggled with for many, many years, and public servants will respect that process. However, there is currently a lot of thinking going on around how it is that we fund our major projects so that we apply agile thinking to our revenue processes. And we go out and we speak with people and we test and you know, experimentation doesn't have to be expensive. You can prototype using pen and paper, right, and go out and just kind of test stuff. So I think that when I'm talking about experimentation, I'm talking about really low fidelity stuff, often that doesn't go anywhere near technology as a solution. But what it means is that we can iterate and we can refine that solution before we start to invest more heavily. And that relates to the election cycle processes, in that if you are then asking for money as the project gets delivered as opposed to one big whack at the very beginning, then you're more likely to get through that cycle, which can be a bit of a blocker and a barrier.
Thanks, Lucy. Kevin, you're at a university, so I guess I know what the answer is going to be, but tell us, should we experiment or not?
No, I think absolutely, because if you don't, the cost of creating a service or a policy that does harm is extremely high. And number two, I think experimentation gives you the option to try out things where the physical actions on a policy are not possible to actually be tried out. So I'll give you an example. So quite a long time back, one of our projects was trying to do the exact thing you called out, which was doing policy simulation around various options to deal with different groups that wanted to cause harm to a country. And so you can't go out and try to say, okay, let's try this with this strategy and actually put individuals' lives at risk. You have to run these models, you have to run these simulations. And we expect that when we look at energy sector, when we look at defense, and even health to a certain degree. But then when we compare it to more the services that the average resident directly interacts with, like paying your rent or doing your taxes, we are more risk averse in terms of experimentation. And this is the strange thing in government to me, is that in the high risk things we actually experiment quite well. In the low risk things we actually don't experiment, which is kind of bizarre to me. But to go back to the question that you began with, in terms of dealing with the constant political noise, so I moved from the US to Australia, and I thought I am going to get away from it, and then I go to Brazil to do projects, and it's even worse there. But see, this is where I actually have great confidence in our public workforce, because they have an amazing capacity to deal with the noise, but they are true to their jobs in terms of delivering public value day in and day out. And so to me, while the political noise is interesting from a media perspective, I think I am less concerned about the future of our public service due to the professionals who are actually doing the job. But however, in countries like Brazil and other places where you have pretty strange policies being deployed right now, we have to be concerned with the noise.
Got it. Thanks, Kevin. have a couple of minutes to finish off the panel. I want to grant both of you a wish, one wish each, please. You can ask for whatever you want as long as it's related to your work.
Robina has already left the room.
Right, so ask for whatever you want. And, Lucy, if you could have one wish granted, what is your biggest dream? What is your biggest challenge? What is the biggest opportunity?
I feel like my staff that watch this afterwards are going to be kicking me because I don't start listing off all the projects we want funded. So actually, if I had one wish, it's going to be really boring. I'm really sorry. It's going to be that we treat the back-end legacy system fixing and improvement just as sexy as the front-end piece. How boring is that? And I'm really sorry. But the problem that we've got now is that we have a lot of political willingness and mandate to shape up and offer our citizens and users, customers, whatever you want to call them, with better services, services that meet their needs, that are designed in a way that makes sense to the individual rather than the department. And they're telling us, go forth, make this happen. So we've got the creation of the Services Australia portfolio at the federal level, all fabulous things. But unless we invest in that back-end system at the same time as that front-end sexy transformation piece, then we're forever going to be indebted to the system. And there are going to be shortcuts that we make which affect not necessarily the front-end user, but the employees in the back end. And it's kind of like, the pig on the lipstick thing. So that's what I would wish for.
Thanks, Lucy. And I was actually about to use the pig on the lipstick metaphor, assuming that you would not be allowed to say that. So, I'm glad to. Excellent. Fantastic. Kevin, your wish.
My one wish, among many, is going to be that we move away from the term government to actually governance. Government forces us to look at an agency or a thing or a thing beyond us. Whereas I think if we are really to take advantage of emerging technologies, the new platforms coming up, so on and so forth, we need to move away from them versus us, government, private, community, and actually focus the conversation around how do we design the next generation of governance. So rather than actually thinking about we need healthcare, we all need to be healthy. So how do we build governance that's in keeping with cross collaboration that moves us from talking about the different groups, so to speak.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Lucy and Kevin for being on stage. Thank you so much. Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Kevin. I need to stay on time, already behind time. The team is going to kill me if we go, too far behind time. So that's why we need to be, or I need to be strategic here. We're going to spend about 45 minutes on the next two panels in total. If you ever need to go to a toilet or grab a glass of water, please feel free to do so. Right? If you feel like sitting like this is a bit long. Now I know you're asking a lot of questions. We can only take a few of them. Fear not, we're archiving them. We're going to look into them, and they will drive a lot of writing pieces that will be coming out after the event, right? So please keep asking those questions. Thank you so much for this one. Now, if I could invite my two next guests on stage, Simon McKee, the Deputy Commissioner here at OSR at Queensland Government, Office of State Revenue, and Ryan Van Lent from SAP, responsible for the public sector globally. Please welcome Simon and Ryan. Ryan has flown from Sydney to us today, so thank you so much for joining us. We'll start with Simon. Simon, I wanted you to tell us a bit about what you do, who you are, but I'm more interested in what's exciting, in your corner of, of the building or in your floor of the building.
Who would have thought tax exciting? But I suppose, so I'm a Deputy Commissioner who said, if I have two metaphoric... Sorry, is that better? Yeah. So if I have two metaphoric children, as picking up on what Lucy was saying, one is business as usual and the other is transformation. And my favourite is transformation, or rather is business as usual for the reasons Lucy said. Essentially that we need that revenue to come in to fund those essential services. So we've got a transformation program going on. We're 2 years into a 3-year digital program, but before we even started that, about 18 months before we did that, we invested heavily in culture and leadership. So we've got 4 strategic pillars, if you will. Culture and leadership is the first. As I say, we invested through human synergistics, and that's a long journey, as you'd all be aware. Particularly, and I wouldn't say just in the public service, but to change mindsets in the public service is very difficult. And we only had to hear Ken Henry at the NAB, the inquiry late last year when he was asked about culture change in the NAB, and he said it was unsurprising if that didn't take at least 10 years. Well, my view is it's continuous, it never ends, obviously. The second pillar, if you will, is around process redesign, and this is where we partnered with QUT to invite we call them taxpayers. One of the interesting things we got from one of the sessions we had, that they don't want to be called clients or customers. As was said earlier, it's not a voluntary interaction, they have to interact with us. So we call them taxpayers. And so we redesigned our process. We invited our industry, our staff, and of course taxpayers in to find out what they needed. We didn't ask what you want because, again, as Lucy was saying, we're not building out gold-plated things in government. We're delivering minimal viable products and we iterate that over time. And that leads into the 46 digital and data initiatives, very ambitious program. We're actually 28 programs all green into that. We've got another 6 in flight. If I do the sums right, that's about 12. Gee, I'm terrible if I'm wrong on that. And that's, there are various complexity and risk around those programs. For example, we shifted 170 odd systems to a new data centre in Canberra, stood up a virtual assistant. The really interesting stuff is around the data. And of course, last but not least is the workforce strategy, which we're about to deploy. And at the very centre of all those things is client-centric. You've heard it a million times, but you walk into one of our meeting rooms and the pair of shoes on the table, and it just reminds our people, that's what it's about. We've got to walk a mile in the shoes of our clients.
Thanks, Simon. And thanks to the anonymous person who asked me what's the topic of this second panel here. We're talking about partnerships. Industry, government, academia. How can we join forces together to explore some of the aspects? So the reason we have Simon and Ryan here on stage at the moment is because a lot of Simon's initiatives and Office of State Revenue is recognized globally as one of the leading tax agencies when it comes to the applications of machine learning in supporting the operations of the agency. And Simon, I'll let you later on talk about how it's not just machine learning, but it's also humans. This leadership, this global leadership, has been enabled, as far as I am aware, through our work that we've been doing with OSR, through the partnership with one of the leading software vendors, SAP, who is also, so disclosure statement, a sponsor of the event today. And so Ryan, tell us a bit more about that partnership. Why do you work with OSR other than because they buy your products and software?
Yeah, thank you, Marek. So yes, as Marek mentioned at the start, my role is as a member of SAP's global public sector team, but more than that, I'm also an active member of what we call SAP's Institute for Digital Government. The Institute for Digital Government is essentially a think tank which works to accelerate innovation at the intersection of emerging technologies and public sector insights. And so what's really key in that is not the technologies themselves, but the context in which they're applied. And the reason that we work so closely with OSR is because of that context. The way that OSR focuses on their end taxpayer and delivers technology to improve the taxpayer's experience and to deliver better outcomes for the citizens. So really that's what's exciting about my role, is seeing not only the emerging technologies and contextualising them for public sector, but making a difference to people's lives.
Thanks, Ryan. Speaking about making a difference to people's lives, and I'm going to switch to Simon. Can you make a difference in people's lives, Simon? And recognizing you're a tax agency, right? So there's a positive change, I'm sure, there as well. Can you make this difference just by yourself? Do you need to partner with others?
I think because of our size, we need to partner with others. So we're 500, and some of the things we're doing, we need scale and capacity, and we simply don't have that. So that's why we partner with QUT, with SAP and other vendors. Can I just quickly say the real reason SAP partnered with us, I found out in the back of an Uber in the US last year, and that is around, I asked that very question of a very senior SAP exec, and he said, it's simple. You guys are small, you operate agile, you're prepared to take risks, we're prepared to invest in you to take those risks to stand stuff up quickly. If it doesn't work, we junk it. If it works, we can actually commercialise that and roll it out. Sorry. So we, going back to Simon's sort of cynic's view about what makes an organisation great or a great organisation, it's around, the why and connecting that to purpose. So I've challenged at town halls all our people to understand why they come into work to earn money, obviously to support their families, to take holidays. But the why organisationally is around raising enough revenue to fund those essential services. Now that sounds a bit of a cliche, but I think more and more our cultural change is embedding that in people's minds, that what they're doing is valuable and worthwhile because it funds hospitals and it funds roads and transports and all those sorts of things. So yes, we can make a difference, and how we make that is a great, I don't know about great, Kerry Packer once said to a Senate Ethics Committee, we don't expect people to pay $1 more than they need to, but they need to pay what they're due, essentially. So we can make a difference with raising as much revenue as possible.
Excellent. Our wonderful audience is asking, Simon, how do you change mindset and drive culture change?
It's a protracted process. As I said, we started 18 months before we even invested in the digital and the data, and it's ongoing. I liken transformation to climbing Mount Everest. Thankfully, nobody's died. I don't think I might be the first doing transformation. And why I say that is, you can have the best people, the best systems, the best processes, but things change rapidly. And if you've got a set strategy and a set mindset, that's inconsistent with transformation. You just can't. And people have a view in government that we have a strategy, and I saw a question up before about the election cycle. Well, it's easy. We went to government with funding bid. It was a pretty robust bid, and for those who know Prince 2 methodology, you do nothing, you renovate, you replace. We took away the do nothing. Hopefully there's no ministers in the audience. To say you've got to do something because the world's changing, we need to change, really rapidly. Very quickly, I remember you walking into one of our disruptive leadership meetings, and the first thing you said was, why couldn't Google run the tax office? And it stunned our people because they came up with all these reasons why Google couldn't run it. And truthfully, I think you answered most of those. The only one was around the data and social licence, that they didn't trust Google. So changing mindsets, long, protracted, difficult, continuous reinforcement, all the things you guys know that you need to invest in. We've invested in a lot of change leadership. We have Change Champion Network, who are the people in the middle, who are the most important in terms of getting that message up and down. Change managers we've invested in, and we've resisted cost cutting with that. And we do culture hacks and things like that. I might walk into a room if I've got time and ask people, can somebody explain to me how this meeting is advancing our strategic priorities? Simple question. And if it's not, see you later, get back to work. Not quite that, but...
So, Simon, you're not very experienced at failing, so I'm not going to ask you a question about that, but there is a question coming from the room about so many large-scale government technology projects failing, and I thought, Ryan, maybe with your global perspective, tell us, what do you see in organizations that fail that might be a good predictor of them failing?
Well, I think what's interesting about this question is actually that we're seeing a shift away from the mega transformation projects of the past. We're seeing a shift to the type of state of mind and state of business that you've described in your Government 5.0 paper, where organisations are looking to incrementally modernise and innovate at the edges. I think that today most government agencies would self-assess themselves as being at around about Government 3.5. And at that step in Government 3, as you've described automation, what we see is organisations looking to identify and move towards a target platform for the core business system with all of the challenges that Lucy described earlier, and then at government and really that's a focus on the what. As we move into Government 4.0, we then start to focus on the how. How do we bring to bear intelligent technologies in order to improve service capability? And then at Government 5.0, this huge focus on personalisation, as you say, it gets us back to the question of why are we doing this in the first place, the why question. And it's about improving citizen outcomes. And I think that this is not a point in time. Let's write a huge requirements document with thousands of requirements and plan out a $1 billion project to decommission the legacy application. What we're starting to see now is something that I think Martin Fowler coined in 2004, which is the strangler fig pattern, which is basically innovating around the edges and progressively working towards the centre and decommissioning that core business application that's been stubbornly resistant to change. So my take on this question is that the interesting thing is not why do so many large-scale government technology projects fail, but why does an organisation like OSR succeed in the way that it has incrementally modernised and changed its state of mind and state of business towards continuous innovation.
So far.
So far. Okay, let's do a post-mortem. Let's imagine you failed in future. Simon, why did you fail?
We actually considered this in our design thinking workshops. We said, how could we make things worse? How could we possibly stuff things up? So that was a really good starting point for us. Look, we're fortunate, as I said, because we're small. We're running 46 projects. That sounds a lot, and it is. And they're, as I say, varying size and complexity. We run it as a pace-laid approach. So what we do is, if one slows or fails, the others go on. Obviously, things like platform as a service renewal, everything sits on that, so that can't fail. And we stood that up in 4 months. We've had a lot of challenges. We're not perfect, and we've learnt from other organisations, and that's why we sit up on podiums like this and talk about it, to share our learnings with other colleagues in government and the private sector. I think it goes back to that cultural thing, why things fail. People aren't engaged from the get-go. So before even the digital and data, I go back to that again, it's about investing in leadership and culture and getting that right, and then continuing to invest in that. I think that's the... And, to be honest with you, a bit of luck too. Good people. We had a good, in our previous commission, a very good sponsor on the SRO, the throat to choke, so I must be expendable. And, of course, we have a fantastic transformation lead who's got a lot of experience in SAP solutions. So it's a whole combination of things.
Do you need to work with other tax agencies? Would you benefit from this?
Yeah, absolutely. We have really close association. So the commissioners have, the state commissioners have a group. We interact closely with our colleagues in the ATO and we share a lot of information about solutions. But as I was talking at a town hall today, we have different paths with the ATO. You know, they're diversified geographically in terms of their size, in terms of their tax base. So we're on different paths, but we still can learn. So for us, for example, machine learning solution, the challenge was why do 20% of land taxpayers not pay their tax on time, whereas all other tax lines, it's only 2%. SAP offered to help us find a solution to that. So they flew a team in from Palo Alto, worked with our team, and one in Brisbane. And in 8 weeks, we stood up a machine learning solution. Now, that's as a service. We bought that as a service going on. So we haven't got the capacity, going back to partnering, we haven't got the capacity nor the funding like the ATO. I think they've got about 400 in their machine learning team. But they've got to compete for data scientists. They've got to compete with Python developers in terms of maintaining that system. And it makes sense for them, don't get me wrong. But for us, it's a different pathway.
Can we get hands up from ATO people in the room?
Yeah.
This? Come on, higher up. Yeah, I know there's a few of you here. Excellent, you know. Good to see you here, right? Look, I mean, I think it's a great opportunity. And the reason I asked you this question, Simon, is one, because that seems to be a popular question from the room as well. Two, last time we met, you were talking a lot about, going together as a fleet of boats or ships. If you want to go far, go together. And so I strongly believe that those partnerships are important. Ryan, do you see any successful partnerships outside of Queensland where agencies actually manage to do it?
Yes, certainly. So, what we see in Queensland is certainly very innovative and leading edge, but not unique. I think that this is a repeatable model. We see it at the local government level with, for example, Auckland Council. Auckland, as OSR have done, have started out by creating a platform for innovation. From the outside, when we look at OSR, when the citizens of Auckland look at their council, they see the innovation that's been done and the touch point with the citizen. But what they don't see is that actually they've, in order to get to that point, there's been a huge amount of consolidation, work on single view of customer, creating a platform on which they can actually innovate, and this is obviously done in partnership.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's one of those projects. The single view of customer is something that we've explored together as well. So the Chair in Digital Economy, together with OSR and SAP being the solution provider behind the scenes, and I think that was a really exciting partnership for us. Definitely something that led us to now explore. I need to be careful with the words that I'm using here, to explore the opportunities for partnerships between OSR, SAP, and QET Chair in Digital Economy. We think that there's great space for the three parties to explore the future of taxation and invite others. So stay tuned for this one. This is more of a just messaging that we're trying to find out whether it makes sense, but stay tuned on this one. I'm going to grant you two wishes, one wish each. I'm sure you knew it was coming, right?
Well, I didn't. I thought you'd shot that one. Apart from world peace, Hawthorn Football Club getting the premiership. Not this year, no, definitely not. Look, I think I'm not concerned about the digital and data, that side of it, because of those partnerships, because they're proven out. I think it's more around that our staff get change fatigued, they don't remain engaged, and particularly the key people in delivering the program. So we're 2 years into a 3-year program. And everybody's a good person, but the people who are critical to the program, you can just see signs of fatigue. So we've got to be very careful. So it's that human element that we don't burn those good people.
Thanks, Simon. That's very powerful. Ryan.
I think that one of the biggest impediments to embracing technology is the issue of data quality. Is that quite often when I engage with government customers, they say, yes, it'd be great to use machine learning to uncover new insights and to automate particular processes, but we're not confident in the quality of our data. And we feel that if we put garbage into the system, then we're going to get a garbage recommendation out of the system. And I think that to an extent, because the machine is making recommendations as probabilities, that you can just get started with the data that you have, and over time, the predictions will improve, and as a result of actually using the machine, what certainly OSR have found, I believe, is that the quality of the data will improve as well as people start to demand better recommendations from the machine. The response is, well, feed it with better information. Make sure that you correctly identify the customer when you're speaking to them. Take good case notes. All of those types of things. So I think that really my wish is that we could just kind of get over this hurdle of having data quality as an impediment and just get started, because I think that there's no reason why we can't start working with the data that we have.
Thanks, Ryan. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Ryan and Simon for this wonderful panel. Thanks, Simon. And thank you, everyone, for those juicy questions as well. Alex, there's only so many we can ask during the panel, so I had to ask about 2 of those. We'll definitely be exploring those, right? They're juicy. Thank you. Please join me now in welcoming Tim Fawcett and Dr. Paula Dodson on stage. Tim has flown to us all the way from Melbourne, and Paula is a senior Pardon? Just from ZBlock, just one of the buildings here, right? Senior academic in the chair in digital economy, senior researcher at the chair in digital economy. Tim, did I say who you're with and what your role is? No, I did not. Why don't you take over from me then?
Thanks, Marek.
Yeah.
My name's Tim Fawcett. I'm the head of government and corporate affairs at Cisco Systems, an IT technology company.
Thanks, Tim. And Paula?
I'm a researcher in your team. We may have met. Here in the chair in digital economy.
That's right. And you focus on?
My research is focused on consumer deviance, so understanding when people engage in naughty behaviours, whether they're illegal or against policy, and I find ways to design it out. But sometimes I try and encourage it because deviance can lead to greater social or economic benefit.
Thanks, Paul. The topic of this panel is it's about growing beyond just government, or shall I say governance now. So partnering with non-for-profits, partnering with community, partnering with economy, really going beyond just the traditional government structures. And so with this in mind, Tim, I wanted to start with you and ask you what keeps you awake at night? Work-related.
Cyber attacks or something like that. No, I guess in the context of government and Gov 5.0, I mean education and understanding of what that really means would be the thing that keeps me awake. I'm a very good sleeper, actually, Marek, but if something kept me awake, it would absolutely be that. And if you were going to grant me a wish, my wish would be that I could wave a magic wand and everyone would be beyond the resistance phase of the latest wave of technology that is right. It's here now. It's not coming. It's here now.
Can you elaborate?
Well, I mean, since the invention of the wheel, people have been resistant to technological change in their lives. We don't do it that way. We do it this way, or this new technology, is going to kill the taxi industry, or pubs are going to close down because of Spotify, or, the world is going to end, doomsday scenarios. We all feel that. It's an extremely human reaction to new technologies or anything new that confronts us. And most of us, as we grow into adults, learn coping mechanisms for getting over that and then moving through that. And some of us even see the opportunities earlier. Some see those opportunities earlier than others. Some take a little bit more time, and some don't see it at all and get kind of left behind. So that would be where I'm going with this, and particularly in the context of how to grow.
Tim, I think we have similar wishes. So my response to that would be, we cannot litigate or regulate our way out of disruption. We need to acknowledge if this new thing's coming in and people are using it. We were chatting earlier about Uber and how you were having conversations with a politician about potentially shutting Uber down. But if you look at why people are using it, it's because there's a better service, or there's a better model, or there's painless with paying, and that's why they're using that. And it's lessons that we took from Napster. The record industry tried to regulate their way out of that disruption. But if they looked at, consumers actually want to be able to choose what songs they're putting together and what their albums are, and so then maybe we should have actually invested in a new business model.
What kind of deviant behavior, I'm just reading the question, I think this is really good. What kind of deviant behavior do you try and encourage, and for what desired outcome? Paula?
It's going to sound like a really boring answer to the juicy question, but process deviance is a really easy example. So people might find a new way of doing business, and it might not be what the policy or procedure says, but it actually leads to greater efficiency outcomes. So it saves the company business or the government department money, saves them money, which brings me to what keeps me awake at night, which is the $176 billion compliance burden that is on our economy, taking up 11% of our GDP. If we could find a better way to make our processes more efficient so people aren't deviant and they do pay their taxes, for instance, in Simon's case, then maybe we wouldn't be spending so much money on these compliance issues, and we could actually find ways to invest in loan shots, like Lucy was talking about earlier.
All right. Now that we know what type of deviance we want to support and benefit from in some ways, let's get back to the grow part of the discussion. So Tim, you talked about cybersecurity and you talked about education. Let me just stick to the education, which I think is part of the growth, right? How do we go outside? So are there any initiatives that you're involved with at the moment that are in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Marek. Yeah, there's several. I mean, great work for what Ryan and SAP are doing. I think all the technology companies now are investing significantly in partnerships with education institutions, universities, yes, but also TAFE colleges, because there is a skills shortage, which is evident. Cisco opened a cybersecurity training skills centre at Victoria Uni St Albans campus, which is Certificate 4 level qualification. So these are the people who are going to defend the networks of universities or banks or public service agencies. And that's, at this stage at least, seen to be a Certificate 4 level accreditation. So this is not someone who's doing high-level research into the next latest and greatest cybersecurity solutions or products. It's actually doing plumbing work, and very critical plumbing work in relation to defending that. So that's one example where we're investing to try and cover all aspects of education in something as critical as cybersecurity. We're investors in the Cybersecurity Cooperative Research Centre, which is at the other end of the scale there, where you're really looking at quite high level and advanced research. So, and then a number of initiatives in between.
So, look, I'm just looking at those questions. Looks like there's lots of triggers in these panels, which is absolutely fantastic. But let's skip to the topic, at least for a second. And Tim, I'm going to. There's another question about Government 6.0 and the privatization of government services to private enterprise. I'm going to expand on this question a bit, and maybe it's not just private enterprise, but it's maybe non-for-profit sector as well. Maybe Tim, if you could start, but then Paula, I want to hear your views as well. Do you think that there's some future in this, especially when we talk about governance rather than government, and blurring the boundaries of the government?
Declaration, I began my life as a graduate administrative assistant in the Department of Industrial Relations in 1993. So I certainly don't think there's a role for the privatisation of government at all. I think markets can be extremely efficient. So we should look to markets, and we should look to competitiveness as a starting point. But I also believe there's a whole bunch of market failures that occur, and certainly in the provision of essential government services, there are plenty of. There shouldn't be wholesale. If Gov 6.0 is the wholesale privatisation of government services to private enterprise, then we're headed down the drain really quickly, in my view. I'll maybe just make one quick comment about my observations of having worked in the private sector and the public sector. The values are really different. In some ways they're similar, but the values are really different, and the accountability is really different as well. And I accept what Kevin said earlier about, there are differences in private and public sector organisations, but I actually think there's large organisations are actually pretty similar. So when you have large government agencies and large private sector agencies, with some variation, they actually operate pretty similarly. So but deep down the values are different. And I loved what Simon said earlier about the motivation of his team, and, purpose is the thing that motivates people to come in to a job every single day. We all want that, because we spend so much of our time now, both during work hours and after work hours, committed to our jobs and our employment, and finding a higher purpose for that is something that I think is essential. And in terms of growing Gov 5.0, finding purpose for people and finding purpose in that concept is one of the keys to its success.
Thanks, Tim. It's a very reassuring response. So thanks so much for that. Paula, you just said you have nothing to add to this answer. That's fine. So I'm taking cues from the audience. Thank you so much for this one. I think the next question is quite juicy as well. I'm again going to rephrase it a bit, but that question about recognizing bias, right, in transformation and personalization that enables passive discrimination. We live in a world where it is possible to discriminate at scale, right? That's something that we haven't seen before. We see algorithmic bias. We see, automation of government decisions that effectively reinforces human decisions that were made in the past without thinking much about why those decisions were made and whether there were any biases. So there's this implicit bias in those as well. What do you think about the world that we live in, Paula?
When I was on a panel with Stanford University Civil Society Lab, and looking at this idea of algorithmic bias and how incredibly prevalent it is becoming. And one of the solutions we explored was this new job to be created in our economy, where when a corporate or a government comes out with something that they've tested, what's the test that goes on before it actually goes to market. There was an example of a set of hand dryers that weren't able to recognize any other hands that weren't white, or or soap dispenser or whatever it was. Kevin brought up the example of the recidivism compass example for looking at predicting recidivism rates, and actually it's just reinforcing bias about the US criminal justice system. And similar things happen here. So I think there's a job to be created around that fairness or justice testing of the algorithms that are being put into market, which speaks again to Lucy and Simon's points of why it's important to iterate and do the minimum viable product, test it before it goes out, before you launch it large, which is why one of the trends Marek was talking about with the mass experimentation, is that what we end up calling it?
Mass simulation.
Sorry, a few edits. this has been keeping me up at night. Mass simulation to be able to run this, to understand how it could affect different groups, especially vulnerable groups in our society, before it's invested.
So this is giving me a headache, sorry, because, I'm thinking about the role of a government at the moment. And shouldn't government be a trusted authority? Now we're hearing all those examples about why we should not trust the government. That's a paradox. I don't know what my question is. Please just, take over from me, whoever wants to.
Well, when we were writing this report, we were filling up your whiteboard, and I wrote a column that said everything that you can argue against everything that we've put in this report. I referenced a previous employee at QUT, Monique Mann, who's a very big advocate, human rights advocate, especially in the digital space. And I also had Kat Matson, who's closing the evening tonight, in mind of, things Kat would say in response to some of these trends. And I just think if the government is going to become a trusted authority in a world where we're losing trust in most institutions, it needs to ask itself that question and consider both sides to the argument, because, as you said, some people think, great, data, new service delivery, personalization. Other people think spying, social credit, and what's going on in the social ratings going on in China.
Yeah, but as we were discussing earlier, Paula, about the Uber example, and this was a conversation I had with at the time, a person who was in opposition in state government who said, we're going to ban Uber if we win government. And I'm like, well, there's 2 million people that are using that app now for a really good reason. So have you thought through that one? But we use that app despite the fact we're giving them all our data. So there's already an investment of trust or an ignorance of what we're actually giving away for free. And we know that now with post-Cambridge Analytica, with Facebook, there's been big backlash against that. So, I think there's, to your point, I think there's a constant tension there. But there's, we're at a really important period of time in Australian history with, I think, the inquiry into, the role of media and particularly their relationship with security agencies at a national level. This is a really important discussion for us to be having as a country, and that notion of trust, I think it goes directly to that notion of trust. And I was so glad to see the Government 5.0 paper reference the notion of transparency, because there's that old cliche about sunlight and transparency, and that ought never be forgotten, particularly if we were talking about things like mass scale algorithms or machine learning that's making decisions about inclusion or exclusion. When I saw that question, I was reminded of how often I used to get turned away at nightclubs by bouncers, who clearly had a bias against me for some reason. So again, it's sort of, if we're talking about doing things at scale, if that's what's different, then I accept that. But if it's just, now there's bias, there's always been bias in every government decision that gets made. If the issue is scale and humans not being attached to it, then I accept that's the difference. Otherwise, it's pretty similar.
Absolutely. Look, a lot of questions that are coming from the audience are in many ways addressing the future public servant. What are the skills that we might need to be successful in the future? And the bias conversation is actually one of them, because being able to recognize bias in data, in algorithms, it's not an easy skill. So what are those skills for the future, right? For everyone in the room, the leaders in public sectors, what should they be focusing on? Paula?
Well, I don't think that there's actually a whole lot of new skills that are emerging. I think there's a lot that already exists around at least the work that I've been doing with government. A lot of public servants already have these skills. One we did talk about very specifically, actually with the work we did with Simon, was speaking to the explainability of automated decisions and the need that you have your policy and ledge team who understand the legislation. You've got the people who are executing the decisions on the front line. You've got the directors who understand the broader strategy that needs to be executed, but you don't have somebody that can explain all of those connected together. So you understand why a form needs to exist, but you may not understand why a question is specifically being asked and how that relates straight back to the legislation. So if you can have some kind of explainability role, that's incredibly important. And then that speaks to the other trend around rules as code. And if we're going to start codifying legislation, even at the university level, we do not have any skill testing going on in our law faculty or in our computer science that's joining those dots together so that we can be drafting legislation today that can be made adaptable into the future. So I think they're the really technical skills, but at a broader level, I think we'll continue to need the soldiers, so the people with the red hats like myself who like just following direction, and then the creatives who are able to think boldly and think of those visions. And I think we already have quite a nice balance of that, but it's about fostering that so that people feel like they can continue making decisions and being bold and having entrepreneurship into the future.
Tim?
Stands beautifully what Paula said.
Thanks, Paul. I think there was we need to talk about this this comment after the panel when she said she's here to follow directions. No, you're not on the team. But look, I think it's a good point in general, that recognition that, there are different roles that we need to play in general. There are those of us who explore the new, the next, and then there are those of us who make sure that the current works and, that we're not disrupting the system too much, right? There's always, sort of an exciting space that we could explore. Let's get back to the growing part, and I still wanted to maybe get a few brief comments about the engagement of government with, organizations outside of the government and what benefits could there be? Is there a reason for some organizations outside of the government to take over some of the functions of the government, for instance? I know we had a comment about non-privatizing, so this is not what I mean, but say innovation spaces, right? Those civic innovation spaces and so on. Tim, I know you're involved in at least one of them and probably more than that.
Yeah, thanks, Marek. And look, the answer is yes and no, so sitting on the fence a bit. But, I think the conversation in the last panel around partnerships was really critical, and being open to different types of partnerships. Yes, I work for a for-profit NASDAQ listed company. I'm going to try and sell you stuff, but you all look like adults to me and can resist my unbelievable charms in selling you the latest Cisco switch or router. So let's put that aside, accept that, and move on. So what are the things that we find in common? So I'm also, I have a master's degree in public policy, so I'm a bit of a policy geek, and I just think, government has a wonderful opportunity to set policy direction. I'll give you an example. A former communications technology came up with this thing called the National Digital Economy Strategy, which kind of was like an excuse for why we funded the NBN. Nonetheless, it had 12 goals or targets that the Australian government set as a result of the uptake of the digital economy. One of them was to double the number of this quaint term, teleworkers, by the year 2020. Double the number of teleworkers by the year 2020, which this document said at the time, which I think was 2011, was 6%. So 6% was going to become 12%. I wrote to the Minister and the Secretary of the Department of Comms and said, well, why doesn't the public service set that goal for itself? And to my great, not surprise, but enthusiasm, they came back and said, great idea, we're setting up a working group, we want you to be on it. And the Deputy Secretary, a guy named Abel Rizvi, who some of you may know, a doyen of the Federal Public Service, ran it. And it was one of the most exciting things I've ever done with government, both as an employee and as someone outside of government, because there was a whole bunch of tech companies, some of my competitors, there was universities and academics, and I knew we were onto something when, with total respect to PwC, who are a sponsor today, the consulting firms came in. I knew we were onto something, and it was a great example of, and we're actually able to achieve some really significant things, including getting the Prime Minister of Australia to launch an idea of ours, which was a National Teleworking Week, which even just saying that word now makes me feel archaic. But at the time, it was a great collaboration between industry and government and academia, and so I think that that's the way forward, is to get those partnerships going.
Thanks, Tim. That's a message that's coming across all of the panels, which is great. I just spotted a really interesting question. It only has 2 likes, but I'm the moderator here, and I just tapped on it. I'm going to ask Paula to try to answer this question. Why should we invest in 5.0? If only 1% of digital, that's the number that World Economic Forum provides. There are other ones you'll see in the report where it's a bit higher, 23% I think is the top one. But why?
I think it speaks beautifully to what Simon said before. You either do nothing, you do something to, whether was it adopt or replace? Renovate. There we go, renovate, replace. So if we don't do anything, then we're just going to stand still. And how is that progressing anything forward? How is that delivering on the public good and public value for what our citizens are increasingly needing in today's society? Who asked that? Why not? Rebut.
All right, let's take this one to good one.
So Marek, just a quick comment there, because you've called 5.0 personalisation. Now that is a transformation. Personalisation of government services, local, state, and federal, in the Department of Government Personalisation, to pick up your theme, that is transformational.
Yep.
So if 5.0 delivers that personalisation, including when government gets out of my way and just lets me get on with stuff, but when I need it, that it's there and it's personalised service for me, that is utopia.
Got it. Since you said it, I need to call out Professor Michael Rosman, who's somewhere at the back of the room, with whom we've been working on that sort of Industry 5.0 models, where we look at evolution of those industries. So you'll see in other of our reports that we're using those terms also for retail, for health, and so on. So it's actually beautiful to see how those digital economy lessons can be applied to various sectors. We're going way over time right now, and it's time to grab some drinks and some canapes and so on. But I want to be fair, and I also want to give you or grant you some wishes.
We did our wishes at the beginning.
You did your wishes at the beginning. Well then we're done. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Tim and Paula for this. Thank you. It's very true. Thank you so much. Thanks, Paula. Thanks, Tim. Before I ask my friend Kat Matson, the Chief Digital Officer of Brisbane, to provide some closing remarks, I was taking notes as well through those panels, and a couple of selections, things that triggered me. There's 6 of them, and probably a bit of overview as well. Lipstick on a pig, right? Let's not focus just on fixing what's outside and making sure it's beautiful, because we know that if we do just that, we might actually cause more trouble than by actually spending time and fixing the back end. I'm not sure what's the metaphor for the opposite of putting lipstick on a pig, but I'm sure there's one there as well. Government turning into governance and changing our mindset about thinking from an institution to the why and the how, which I also thought was very interesting. The strangular fig pattern strategy. I'll try to apply it somewhere. When you want to take over a particular, or change how things are done. The fact that here in Queensland we're small and agile, and that allows us to be very innovative and explore new directions. This is so motivating. That makes me think. I'm so glad to be here and working. With the organizations here, as much as we work with other governments, state and federal levels, but definitely, it's very good to hear that. And let's think about, us public servants as soldiers and the creative types, and let's not try to be both at the same time. It is important to understand that some of us have a role of making sure that the lights are on all the time, while others are, tinkering and thinking, how can we get rid of the lights or so, right? That's important to explore. And finally, and again, this is, I wrote it when Tim was speaking, but this was coming through every panel, that partnerships are critical. Nothing can be achieved when we just do things alone by ourselves. So let's remember that. Culture change takes time and investment to be successful, right? If we just iterate on the edges, that's not enough. But we need to iterate on the edges continuously, right? We need to have this continuous next growth. And I think Paula said it as well. You cannot legislate your way out of disruption, right? So there's no denying of the world that is around us. We need to really respond to it and respond to it well. Kat, can I please invite you on stage and ask you to provide some closing remarks? Oh, excellent.
I need all of my hands. All of my hands. So I get the pleasure of standing between you and drinks. So I better make it pretty good, huh? It's been a big conversation this evening, and I think there's a number of things that I want to call out as I sit as the city's Chief Digital Officer and as the Head of Innovation at the city's Economic Development Board, Brisbane Marketing. I have kind of the dual perspective, if you like. I'm a quasi-public servant, but I don't necessarily sit in council, and I don't necessarily sit directly in that government piece. My focus is more on economic development. So throughout the evening, we've explored Marek and Paula's position around Government 5.0, and Marek took us through the different evolution stages, if you like, of where government has come from particularly when we started this conversation way back when the Chair in Digital Economy first came together and we started talking about digital identity. We've looked at, throughout the last 5 years, we've looked at things like proactive government. Tonight we talked about this notion of we're currently sitting potentially at Government 5.0, which is that personalisation. One of the things that occurred to me, though, is that that entire premise is based on the citizen needing something from the government. When I think of some of the council's digital transformations, it's the stuff that you would never think of, like smart watering systems, like artificial intelligence use in trapping the right animals and not trapping the wrong animals. So I'm not sure where in this model of Government 5.0 that digitalisation sits, because that's just doing our thing. Marek also talked about the notion that perhaps we need T-shaped people, the people who can connect all the various skills and pillars that are required for transformation. And I was actually thinking, well, that's me, because I connect everybody and everything, and does that make me Mrs. T? And I wondered how I'd look with a mohawk, for those who can remember Mr. T. The panel conversations were very interesting. We talked about building with Lucy and Kevin. For those who were sitting at the back of the room, what you missed was Lucy's shoes. Make sure you cop an eyeful of those before we finish. They were pretty awesome. We touched on the DTA's approach on looking at different life events and shaping up a life event orientated service offering from a government. I then wonder, though, what happens with footpaths, because that's not a life event. That's just a provision of a service. I really deeply felt the wish that Lucy had around treating the back-end improvements as just as sexy, because one, there's actually no announceable value in the back end, and so it is very hard to get them off the ground, but without them, the rest falls down. We talked with Simon and Ryan about partnerships and the importance of partnerships, and in fact the whole notion of partnerships is a theme that I'm going to come back to. I love though Simon's question around that they've asked at the Office of State Revenue, how could we actually make it worse? In a tax agency, I think that's hilarious. And I'm really glad that they haven't. I'm really glad that was... And of course, I'm going to love the conversation around growing with Paula and Tim, and particularly any conversation about deviance. By that stage, Slido had absolutely lit up with conversations of deviance. You're all sick puppies, but that's okay. I think in particular this notion of the unintended consequences and the tension between the convenience that we want as citizens and the data that we're sharing. And the model that I often come back to is, sure, I'm happy to give Google and Facebook all of my data, because the worst that they're going to do with that is give me more relevant ads. But when a government has the ability to do bad stuff with my data, that's a different conversation. And then I did see an interesting conversation going on Twitter around trust. And so we talked a little bit in that panel conversation around the importance of trust in government, but trust requires relationship and trust requires people. And where in a government transaction or in a government relationship do you get that opportunity to build trust? Because what we're actually arguing in the Government 5.0 model is that it's invisible. And so there isn't the relationship to build the trust. So I find that's a very interesting tension that we can explore. But as I said, this whole concept of partnerships came up over and over again. It was up on Slido, it was on the Twitter stream, and it was certainly in many of the conversations. And it's one of the things that I'm actually probably most proud of in my time as CDO of the city, is that we have developed an open innovation platform that enables just that kind of partnership, where we bring together residents, students, entrepreneurs, startups, corporates, and academia to solve the city's chunkiest, wickedest, and sometimes it feels like they are the unsolvable problems. Whether it's social isolation and exclusion, whether it's building neighbourhoods of pride, whether it's how do we best support our small businesses, they're the challenges that we've dealt with over the last 4 years through our Digital Brisbane initiative and through the Digital Brisbane Strategy 2.0 to empower residents and businesses to actually contribute to their city. Because I think one of the consistent themes that I heard throughout tonight's conversation was the expectation that people want government services to be more responsive and to be more like, say, private services, more effective and efficient, like we get in the private market. But we don't want the anarchy or the price gouging that would happen if we did privatise all government services. And so instead, it's how do we create the platforms where we can actually collaborate together to come up with solutions. In Brisbane's Smart Connected Brisbane strategy, we actually talk about the changing role of government. And so in the old days, it was very much the funder, the regulator and the provider, but now there's kind of also this notion of the partner, the advocate and the facilitator. And I actually think the facilitator role is probably one of the most exciting for us as a city, because we can facilitate the right combination of market and government-led solutions to the services or to the challenges that are facing any particular jurisdiction. So it's been an extraordinary conversation, and it wouldn't have happened without a whole lot of people. So tonight I need to thank the speakers, first of all. Lucy, Tim and Ryan, you travelled a long way just to be here. Kevin, you don't normally travel, but you travelled a long way to be here tonight. Thank you. And also to Paula and Simon, who just walked down the road. But thank you. There are some gifts coming your direction. Yes, they're coming. Come on out. There are some gifts coming your direction. I'm going to tell you what they are because I was always a terrible Santa Claus. They're a small gift of socks. So the socks actually are from Enactus, which is a QUT group a student group, dedicated to enabling progress through entrepreneurial innovation. I personally love these socks. I already have a pair. They come from Best Foot Forward, which is a social impact enterprise that helps Indigenous artists, and all funds that are raised through the purchase of these socks go to enhancing Indigenous youth literacy rates. So thank you very much, speakers, for joining us. You're all here tonight and none of you paid. Well, that's except for the sponsors. In all seriousness, conversations like these don't happen without sponsors. So our primary sponsor this evening, SAP, so thank you to Chris, Ryan, Ian and Isabella. Thank you so much for your support. And it was funny watching the Slido comments. Sure, any large tech company has a reputation. And I really, really, really admire SAP for continuing to show up in these conversations and continue to do more work and partnerships. So thank you, SAP. We also have QUTX as a major supporter. Thank you very much to Bob O'Connor and your team for joining us this evening and supporting. I was having a quick conversation with Bob over lunch today, and one of the things that I love about QUTX is that they are actually bringing the whole of university to customise education for corporates. For me, it's actually that utopia, proper utopia, not the TV show Utopia, that proper utopia of conversation and corporate education for a real world. So thank you very much, Bob, for your support tonight. Of course, the Chair in Digital Economy wouldn't exist if it weren't for the founding partners and some of us who had some crazy ideas all those years ago around the need to have a partnership between state, city, academia and industry to help us understand not just what the trends were, but what the implications were in the digital economy. So thank you very much, PwC, the Queensland Government, QUT and us for coming on board. It truly is one of my proudest projects. I can't say achievements, but one of my proudest projects as Chief Digital Officer, and it is a absolute flagship in the Digital Brisbane strategy. Finally, thank you to you. This event sold out weeks ago, and as I rock up to many of these events, in fact, I have another one on Thursday night, we know that the appetite for these style of conversations is growing, not diminishing, so thank you. Later on this evening, in fact, you've possibly already got it, depending on how fast the internet gods are working, you're going to get an email from the Chair in Digital Economy, which is your digital goodie bag. There's going to be juicy reading, there's going to be a copy of the Government 5.0 report, there's going to be some links and whatnot. Before we head over to the bar, I think probably my highlight for this evening was the comments around putting lipstick on a pig. Because that is a huge part of what we often feel like we're being asked to do in the public service. And when you watch the TV show Utopia, yes, that's the reputation that we often have. However, we are working really hard to balance all of the different stakeholder needs. But the reason I particularly like that comment was because I often say that sci-fi or Black Mirror should be compulsory viewing for anybody working in tech and digital in the public sector, because it just has you think about what you're actually doing and what might happen. And so for anybody who watched that first ever episode of Black Mirror, lipstick on a pig and digital in government just was the perfect analogy. So thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the drinks, and I look forward to seeing you next time.